King Charles shocked the entire United Kingdom when he issued an extraordinary royal decree after secret documents revealed that Prince Philip had left the most meaningful part of his private fortune, not to his children, but to Catherine, Princess of Wales. Inside Buckingham Palace, the newly crowned king stood before Britain's most powerful royal advisors, holding the sealed instructions his late father had hidden for years. Across from him sat Catherine, the composed future queen who had entered the royal family as a commoner, struggling to understand why Prince Philip had trusted her with wealth, property, and a final responsibility that could reshape the monarchy. But while Catherine fought back tears, others in the room stared at her with disbelief, because Charles's decree did far more than protect Prince Philip's fortune. It threatened to expose why the late Duke had deliberately passed over those closest to him. Prince William reached for Catherine's trembling hand, but King Charles had not yet read the most disturbing paragraph. Why had Prince Philip secretly chosen Catherine? What did he know about her that the entire UK did not? And what was hidden inside King Charles's shocking decree that made one senior royal rise from their chair and whisper, "If this becomes public, nothing in this family will ever be the same again"? The senior royal was Queen Camilla. She stood beside a gilded table beneath portraits of monarchs whose private wealth had survived wars, scandals, and broken marriages. Her diamonds caught the afternoon light, but her face had lost all color. "What exactly do you mean by left to Catherine?" she asked. No one answered immediately. King Charles lowered his eyes to the document. As sovereign, he controlled magnificent royal residences, priceless collections, and vast institutional resources, although much of that grandeur belonged to the crown, rather than to him personally. William, as Prince of Wales, now managed the enormously valuable Duchy of Cornwall. Catherine shared his privileged life, but she had never possessed an independent royal fortune capable of shifting power inside the family. Until now. Sir Edmund Hawthorne, Prince Philip's private solicitor, placed a black leather case on the table. For 4 decades, he had protected the Duke's confidential affairs. He explained that this was not a replacement for Philip's publicly understood estate arrangements. It was a separate private trust, lawfully created from personal investments, inherited jewelry, unpublished writings, and several properties held through private companies. Its existence had remained sealed until 2 conditions were fulfilled: Queen Elizabeth's death and Charles's accession. "The trust is valued at £42 million, Hawthorne said. But its value was never the Duke's principal concern. Catherine remembered Prince Philip watching her during her earliest palace years, when she was still learning which doors to enter and when silence was wiser than explanation. Once, after she had remained beside a frightened child at a charity event long after the cameras departed, Philip had told her quietly, "Never let the palace teach you to perform compassion." She had believed it was simple advice. Now it felt like a test she had unknowingly passed. Charles broke the red seal on the final page. "My father anticipated resistance," he said. "That is why he asked the reigning monarch to issue this decree." Camilla's fingers tightened around the back of her chair. William leaned forward. "What decree?" Charles looked first at his son, then at Catherine. "One that prevents any member of this family, including me, from taking the fortune away from her." Beneath the decree lay a handwritten letter bearing Philip's unmistakable signature. Charles unfolded it, read the opening line, and suddenly stopped. Catherine saw grief enter the king's eyes. "What does it say?" she whispered. Charles looked across the table at Camilla. "It says my father knew someone would try to destroy the trust before Catherine ever discovered it." For several seconds, only the quiet ticking of the French clock could be heard. Queen Camilla slowly returned to her chair. "Surely Philip did not name the person." "No," Charles replied, still studying the letter, "but he left evidence." Sir Edmund unlocked a second compartment in the leather case and removed 3 cream folders. Each carried the same handwritten warning: Do not open separately. He explained that Prince Philip had designed the trust carefully. Charles's decree was not a law imposed upon Britain, nor could the king simply rewrite inheritance law. It was a binding royal household order, supported by Philip's trust deed, which had appointed the reigning sovereign as its protector. By signing it, Charles refused permission for the trust to be altered and prohibited palace staff, royal offices, and family representatives from interfering with Catherine's inheritance. The newspapers would call it a royal decree. Legally, it was something quieter, but almost impossible to defeat from within the palace. "Why all this protection?" William asked. "Because someone challenged the trust 3 times, Sir Edmund answered. The first attempt came before the Duke died. Catherine felt William's hand stiffen around hers. A memory carried her back to Windsor Castle in 2017. Prince Philip had recently announced his retirement after decades of public service. Age had bent his shoulders, but it had not softened his judgment. During a family luncheon, Catherine had noticed him watching relatives argue over patronages, residences, and influence. Later, she had found him alone beside a window. "They think retirement means I have stopped noticing things," Philip had said. Catherine smiled. "Have you? My dear girl. I notice more because nobody bothers pretending around an old man." He had then asked what she would do if she inherited something powerful. "Protect it for the children," she had answered. Philip's expression had changed, although she had not understood why. "Even if keeping it made your own life harder. If it truly belonged to the future, it would not be mine to spend." The memory released her. Sir Edmund opened the first folder. Inside was a copied instruction sent to Philip's financial trustees in 2019, requesting that Catherine's name be removed and replaced with "the sovereign's spouse." The request had failed because it lacked Philip's signature. Camilla's eyes flashed. "Are you suggesting that came from me?" "I am suggesting nothing," Sir Edmund said. The instruction was routed through a palace office. The author concealed their identity. He opened the second folder. A similar request had arrived in March 2021, weeks before Philip's death. This time, it claimed Catherine had been selected during a period of declining judgment and demanded an urgent medical assessment of the Duke's mental capacity. William rose so suddenly that his chair struck the floor. "My grandfather was dying, and someone was trying to declare him incapable?" Catherine touched his arm. "William." But anger had already broken through the discipline expected of Britain's future king. Charles did not rebuke him. He remembered his father's final months, the hospital corridors, the unanswered fears, the painful knowledge that their last conversation might truly be their last. Beneath the crown and inherited privilege, he was still a son, discovering that someone had used his father's weakness as an opportunity. "There was a third attempt," Sir Edmund said quietly. He turned the final folder towards Charles. The request was dated 2 days after Queen Elizabeth's funeral. This one carried an authorization code belonging to the king's private office. Charles stared at it. Only 4 people had access to that code. "One of them," Sir Edmund replied, "is sitting in this room." Catherine looked around the table, but Camilla was no longer watching the solicitor. She was watching Prince William. Camilla's fixed gaze made William release Catherine's hand. "Why are you looking at me?" he asked. "Because you demanded an audit of the king's private office after the funeral," Camilla replied. "You told Charles that too many people possessed too much access. I demanded it because security had become careless, or because you already knew what an audit might uncover." William's anger sharpened, but Catherine stepped between accusation and reaction. "Neither of us knew the trust existed," she said. "Fighting among ourselves is exactly what the person behind this expects." Her calmness changed the room. It was the same discipline she had learned during years of entering palaces filled with inherited titles and private rivalries. Catherine possessed designer wardrobes. historic jewels on loan and access to royal residences. But she also understood that privilege inside the monarchy could disappear with one scandal. Her greatest protection had never been money. It was restraint. Charles turned to Sir Edmund. "Name the 4 people." "The authorization code belonged to Your Majesty," the solicitor answered. "Access was also granted to Queen Camilla, your private secretary, Lord Peregrine Ashcombe, and your chief equerry, Tobias Reed." Both men were present. Tobias, a decorated former military officer, stood rigid beside the door. His family had money, but no ancient title, and his loyalty had been earned through 30 years of service. Lord Peregrine occupied the opposite end of the table. Tall, silver-haired and almost unnaturally composed, he had inherited an £18 million estate in Norfolk, yet his true wealth was influence. His father had advised Queen Elizabeth. His grandfather had served George VI. Peregrine had grown up believing that governments changed, monarchs died, but men like him remained to guide the crown. "Codes can be copied," Peregrine said. "This proves very little." Sir Edmund removed a technical report from the folder. The request was transmitted from a secure terminal inside the Queen Consort's private sitting room. Every face turned towards Camilla. She rose again, this time with anger rather than fear. "I did not send it, but it came from your room," Charles said. "During the days after your mother's funeral, that room was never empty. Staff carried papers in and out. Peregrine handled my correspondence while I attended engagements with you." For the first time, the private secretary's perfect composure shifted, only slightly. Catherine noticed because Philip had once taught her to watch what people did in the instant before they remembered they were being observed. Peregrine's thumb pressed against his signet ring, covering its engraved crest. The same crest appeared faintly in wax on the 2019 instruction. Catherine said nothing. A suspicion was not proof, and she could almost hear Philip warning her against striking before the target believed himself safe. Charles opened his father's handwritten letter again. The next paragraph explained that the fortune had been built quietly from decades of private investments, royalties from published works, and property acquired without public funds. Philip had placed it beyond ordinary family pressure because he feared the monarchy was becoming more concerned with preserving comfort than preserving purpose. Then Charles reached the final sentence. "If the 3rd attempt is made," he read, "play the recording marked Catherine, December 2019. Do not allow her to hear it alone." Sir Edmund withdrew a small digital recorder from beneath the folders. Peregrine moved towards the door. Tobias blocked him. "Sit down, my lord." The recording began with Prince Philip's tired breathing. Then his unmistakable voice filled the room. "If Catherine is hearing this, someone inside the palace has already betrayed her." Prince Philip's recorded voice was weaker than Catherine remembered, but every word carried the force of a man who had spent a lifetime refusing to be ignored. "I did not choose Catherine because she married the heir," he said. "I chose her because she understands that belonging to this family is not the same as owning it." Catherine lowered her eyes. The recording returned her to her first Christmas at Sandringham, when every corridor seemed to contain a rule she had not learned. She had arrived from a prosperous but untitled family, knowing that some courtiers considered her too ordinary for William. Philip had watched her greet servants by name, kneel to speak with children, and quietly remove herself whenever photographers tried to turn private kindness into performance. Years later, he had watched her endure public scrutiny, motherhood, and relentless expectations without demanding special sympathy. She made mistakes, but she learned from them. More importantly, she never treated the crown as a prize she had won. "William will inherit land, income, and constitutional responsibility," Philip continued. "But an heir is surrounded by people trained to agree with him. Catherine must have something no courtier can withdraw: the independence to tell a future king when he is wrong." William's eyes filled with emotion. "So that was grandfather's reason," he whispered. "Not all of it," Sir Edmund warned. "On the recording, Philip explained that the £42 million fortune would fund the Hartwell Legacy Trust. Catherine would receive its income and control its charitable direction, but she could not sell its central assets for personal luxury. Those assets included Hartwell House, agricultural land, investment holdings, and a private archive documenting decades of royal charitable decisions. The arrangement protected Catherine, but it also bound her to a purpose: supporting military families, vulnerable children, and elderly people who had served the crown without becoming wealthy from it. The fortune was hers, yet it had been built to serve others. Then Philip's tone darkened. In 2018, I discovered that money intended for veterans' housing had been redirected through advisory companies. The transactions were technically disguised, but they were morally indefensible. Peregrine's hand closed over his signet ring. Philip had given 3 senior advisors different confidential summaries of the proposed trust. Each contained a deliberately unique phrase. Only Peregrine's copy described Catherine's replacement as the sovereign's spouse. The wording in the first attempt was not merely suspicious, it was a fingerprint. Camilla turned towards him. "You used me." Peregrine remained seated, but the confidence left his face. "You cannot accuse me on the basis of a phrase." "No," Sir Edmund replied, "but we can accuse you on the basis of the financial records stored at Hartwell House." Peregrine gave a thin smile. "Records can disappear." Catherine felt cold. The solicitor's silence answered before his words did. Hartwell House had suffered an electrical fire 3 nights earlier. The damage had been contained, and no one had been injured, but the room containing Philip's original ledgers had been destroyed. William moved towards Peregrine. Tobias caught his arm before anger overcame judgment. "You burned them," William said. "You have no evidence of that." Peregrine was right. Philip's recording revealed the betrayal, but a dead man's accusation and a repeated phrase might not survive a determined legal challenge. Without the ledgers, Catherine could inherit the fortune while remaining unable to prove why someone had tried to steal it. Then Catherine remembered something from her final private conversation with Philip. He had pressed an old brass key into her palm and said, "The most valuable things at Hartwell are never kept inside the house." She had carried that key for years without knowing what it opened. Now, as everyone argued around her, Catherine reached beneath her necklace and drew it into the light. Peregrine's smile vanished. Catherine placed the brass key beside Prince Philip's letter. Sir Edmund examined the tiny number engraved along its stem. "This does not belong to Hartwell House," he said. "It belongs to a private deposit box at Coutts." Peregrine stood abruptly. "This meeting is becoming absurd." King Charles faced the advisor who had served his family for nearly 3 decades. Peregrine's tailored suit, inherited title, and Norfolk estate represented the polished security of Britain's old aristocracy. But the king now saw something colder beneath that refinement. A man who had confused proximity to the crown with ownership of it. "You are suspended from royal service," Charles said, effective immediately. "You cannot detain me." "No," Charles replied, "but palace security can escort you from my residence, preserve your office, and surrender all relevant records when the police obtain legal authority." Peregrine looked towards Camilla, perhaps expecting the woman whose office he had manipulated to protect him. She did not. "You used my terminal and placed suspicion upon me," she said. "You not ask me to rescue you from the consequences." As Tobias escorted Peregrine away, the advisor paused beside Catherine. "Philip gave you a burden disguised as a gift," he murmured. "Before this ends, your children will wish he had chosen someone else." The threat struck deeper than Catherine allowed anyone to see. 2 hours later, Charles, William, Catherine, Camilla, and Sir Edmund entered the private banking rooms on the Strand. The deposit box had been registered in Philip's name in 2017, with Catherine listed as its eventual controller, once the trust's two conditions were fulfilled. Her brass key alone was insufficient. Sir Edmund carried the corresponding legal authorization and identity documents. Philip had designed every step so that neither sentiment nor royal pressure could bypass procedure. The box contained no crowns or glittering jewels. It held 6 encrypted drives, duplicate ledgers, and a blue notebook worn soft at the edges. Catherine opened it carefully. Philip's handwriting recorded dates, companies, and payments connected to veterans' housing funds. Millions had passed through firms controlled by Peregrine's former university associate. Some money returned through inflated palace consultancy contracts. Other amounts disappeared into overseas accounts. William's jaw tightened. He stole from veterans. He called it administrative restructuring, Sir Edmund said. The people waiting for adapted homes called it another winter without help. Inside the notebook lay photographs of injured former soldiers living in unsuitable buildings. One showed a father being carried upstairs by his teenage daughter because their council flat had no lift. Catherine covered her mouth. The fortune suddenly stopped being an abstract collection of investments and properties. It became Philip's late attempt to repay people whom the institution had praised publicly but failed privately. Charles turned away. For all his palaces, ceremonial guards, and inherited treasures, he had never felt poorer. Camilla opened the final envelope. "This is addressed to you." Charles read his father's last instruction. Philip wanted the sovereign not merely to protect Catherine's inheritance, but to force every royal charitable fund to undergo independent annual examination. No advisor, spouse, heir, or monarch would be exempt. "That is the real decree," Charles said. Sir Edmund nodded. "And once announced, it cannot remain a private family matter." Catherine looked at the evidence. "Then announce it." Before Charles could answer, William's telephone vibrated. A breaking news notification filled the screen. Confidential documents had been leaked claiming Catherine had pressured a confused, dying Prince Philip into leaving her £42 million. The public did not yet know about the stolen veterans' money. They knew only that Britain's future queen appeared to have taken a dying man's fortune. And outside the bank, reporters were already gathering. Across the United Kingdom, conversations stopped. The king's confession traveled through homes, hospitals, military barracks, and crowded railway stations. Viewers had expected a careful palace denial. Instead, Charles displayed the document bearing his signature and explained how Lord Peregrine Ashcombe had hidden the diversion of veterans' funds behind respectable language. "I did not knowingly authorize dishonesty," Charles said, "but leadership cannot claim credit for every success and blame advisors for every failure." Inside the broadcast room, William watched his father surrender the protection monarchs had traditionally found in silence. Catherine sat beside Camilla, still carrying the pain of the accusation against her, but something inside her softened. Charles was not merely defending her. He was placing his own reputation between her and the lie. The king then issued the full Hartwell decree. All royal charitable accounts would undergo independent annual audits. Significant contracts would be published, conflicts of interest disclosed, and complaints examined outside palace control. The £42 million Hartwell Legacy Trust would remain under Catherine's stewardship, protected from interference by any monarch, spouse, heir, or courtier. Its first duty would be restoring every veterans' housing project damaged by the diverted funds. Charles went further. Until the missing money was recovered, he would contribute income from his own private investment portfolio to the affected families. The Crown's institutional property could not simply be given away as though it were his personal possession, but the king could answer with wealth that genuinely belonged to him. "This decree does not punish privilege," he concluded. "It reminds privilege of its debt." At the private airfield, Peregrine sat inside a chartered aircraft believing his old connections would carry him beyond British jurisdiction. But Sir Edmund had already delivered the ledgers, digital records, and Philip's recording to investigators. An emergency warrant was obtained on suspicion of fraud, destruction of evidence, and attempted concealment of criminal proceeds. Police vehicles surrounded the aircraft before it reached the runway. For the first time in his life, Peregrine discovered that a family name could open doors, but could not hold them open forever. Back at the palace, the public response began to shift. Veterans' families recognized photographs from housing campaigns that had mysteriously lost funding. Former employees confirmed that Peregrine's consultancy network had demanded unexplained fees. Legal specialists explained that Catherine had not received £42 million for unrestricted personal spending. She had inherited stewardship of a protected charitable trust. Camilla requested permission to speak briefly after the king. She admitted that she had recommended Peregrine for greater access during the chaotic months surrounding the accession. "I trusted familiarity when I should have demanded accountability," she said. "Catherine did not create this crisis. She became its target." The admission did not erase every suspicion, but it closed the division Peregrine had tried to create between the two women. When the cameras were switched off, Catherine expected relief. Instead, Sir Edmund handed her Philip's final envelope. "You must read this before accepting the trust formally." Inside was a single page. Philip had written that Catherine remained free to refuse the fortune. He knew public duty had already consumed years of her life, and he would not command her to sacrifice her children's peace for his unfinished work. Then came the final condition. If Catherine accepted, she had to place the trust permanently beyond the direct inheritance of George, Charlotte, and Louis. None of her children could ever divide its capital or claim Hartwell House as a private home. The fortune would belong to service forever. William read the condition over her shoulder. "You can walk away," he whispered. "No one would blame you." Catherine looked towards the palace windows, beyond which the country waited to discover whether she had wanted Prince Philip's money or understood why he had chosen her. Then she asked Sir Edmund for a pen. By the time the royal party returned to Buckingham Palace through a private entrance, the false story had crossed Britain. Headlines accused Catherine of manipulating Prince Philip during his final years. Commentators questioned why a woman already surrounded by royal residences, valuable jewelry, and duchy income needed another £42 million. The leaked documents omitted the trust's charitable restrictions, the veterans' records, and Philip's recorded explanation. The lie was powerful because it contained one visible truth: Catherine was the beneficiary. William paced inside the king's library. Peregrine planned this. He knew exactly which pages to release. He also knew the public would judge Catherine before the palace could answer, Camilla said. Catherine stood near the window, watching camera crews gather beyond the gates. She had endured cruel headlines before, but this accusation attacked the quality Philip had valued most: her integrity. Her telephone rang. It was Prince George. "Mummy, people outside school are saying you stole great-grandpapa's money." Catherine closed her eyes. For one painful second, she was no longer the Princess of Wales or a future queen. She was simply a mother trying to prevent adult cruelty from entering her child's heart. "I did not steal anything," she told him gently. "I know, but why are they saying it?" "Because they have heard only part of the story. Will you tell them the rest?" Catherine looked across the room at Charles. "Yes," she promised, "even if the truth is difficult." After the call ended, Charles ordered his communications team to prepare an immediate statement. His advisors recommended denying undue influence while keeping Philip's financial records confidential. Releasing everything, they warned, could damage the monarchy far more seriously than the allegation against Catherine. Sir Edmund opened one of the duplicate ledgers. "There is something Your Majesty must see before deciding." A 2018 restructuring order appeared among the transactions. It had allowed Peregrine's network to move charitable funds through outside consultants. At the bottom was Charles's signature. William stared at his father. "You approved it?" "I approved a proposal to reduce administrative costs," Charles said. "Peregrine's briefing never mentioned veterans' housing. But your signature gave him authority." The truth settled heavily between them. Charles had not stolen the money, but he had trusted a polished advisor more than he had examined the lives affected by his decision. Philip had discovered the failure and quietly built the Hartwell Trust to repair it. Camilla approached her husband. "If you release those records, they will blame you. They should know what happened under my authority. You were deceived." Charles looked towards Catherine. "So was she, yet she is paying the price publicly." For most of his life, Charles had waited to inherit the crown. He had entered kingship surrounded by palaces, private estates, and constitutional ceremony. But none of that wealth could purchase the one thing Philip's final test demanded: moral courage. Catherine placed the blue notebook before him. "Your decree will mean nothing if it protects only the people we love," she said. "It must also examine the mistakes we made." At 6 o'clock, the palace announced that the king would address the nation live. Minutes before the broadcast, security officers entered with urgent news. Peregrine's car had been found abandoned near a private airfield. His passport was missing, and a chartered aircraft was preparing to depart. But Charles did not cancel the address. He sat before the cameras, placed Philip's letter beside him, and began with words no British monarch had ever spoken publicly. "My father left a fortune to Catherine because he had discovered a failure within this royal household. And that failure began with a document bearing my signature." Catherine held the pen above the acceptance document, but she did not sign immediately. She thought of George's frightened telephone call, Charlotte's growing awareness of public judgment, and Louis, who still believed palaces were simply enormous houses where adults whispered too much. Accepting Philip's fortune would bind their mother to another lifetime responsibility. Refusing it might restore some peace. But it would also abandon the families whose photographs filled Philip's blue notebook. "Before I sign," Catherine said, "I want one amendment." Sir Edmund looked concerned. "The trust's central conditions cannot be changed. I am not asking to change them. I want my children prohibited from inheriting the capital exactly as Prince Philip instructed, but permitted to serve the trust when they become adults, if they choose." William looked at her with quiet pride. "They should inherit its purpose," Catherine continued, "not its wealth." Sir Edmund added the clarification. Catherine signed. At that moment, the question that had shaken the royal family was finally answered. Prince Philip had not chosen Catherine because he valued her above his own children. He had chosen her because she understood the difference between possessing wealth and protecting it. William would inherit the duchy, the responsibilities of the crown, and eventually the throne. Catherine had been given something less visible, but equally demanding: the independence to defend the monarchy's conscience, even against the monarchy itself. King Charles countersigned the Hartwell Decree. The following morning, its complete terms were published. The entire United Kingdom saw that the king had not issued a law placing himself above Parliament. He had used his lawful authority as protector of Philip's private trust and head of the royal household to impose accountability upon his own institution. That distinction made the decree realistic. Its consequences made it historic. In the months that followed, freezing orders secured millions connected to Peregrine's network. He was formally charged, although the courts, not the palace, would determine his guilt. Hartwell House was repaired, and investigators confirmed that the fire had been deliberately started by a contractor linked to one of Peregrine's companies. The originals were lost, but Philip's protected duplicates ensured the truth survived. Veterans' housing projects restarted. The father photographed being carried upstairs by his daughter, received an accessible home with a ground-floor bedroom. When Catherine visited, no cameras were allowed inside. "You remembered us," the daughter said. Catherine shook her head. Prince Philip remembered. "I am only finishing what he began." 1 year after Charles's shocking decree, Hartwell House opened as the headquarters of the Legacy Trust. William, Camilla, and the King stood beside Catherine. But the first people invited through its doors were military families, retired palace employees, and children supported by its programs. George approached the blue notebook displayed inside a glass case. "Is this what great-grandpapa left you?" he asked. Catherine placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, he left me a choice." "And did you make the right one?" She looked towards Charles. The king appeared older than he had a year earlier, but lighter too. By admitting the failure attached to his signature, he had protected something more valuable than a perfect reputation. He had protected public trust. "I chose to make sure the money could never belong to just one family again," Catherine answered. Outside, the bells began to ring. Prince Philip's fortune had nearly divided the royal family. Instead, Catherine transformed it into a promise. Camilla chose accountability over self-protection. William learned that defending his wife sometimes meant allowing her to stand for herself, and Charles shocked the entire United Kingdom by issuing a decree that placed duty above wealth, even when the truth threatened his own throne. The late Duke had understood what Peregrine never did. Money could purchase silence for a season, but character decided what survived after the doors of the palace finally opened.